يا أيها الذين آمنوا لا تدخلوا بيوتا غير بيوتكم حتى تستأنسوا وتسلموا على أهلها ذلكم خير لكم لعلكم تذكرون فإن لم تجدوا فيها أحدا فلا تدخلوها حتى يؤذن لكم وإن قيل لكم ارجعوا فارجعوا هو أزكى لكم والله بما تعملون عليم ليس عليكم جناح أن تدخلوا بيوتا غير مسكونة فيها متاع لكم والله يعلم ما تبدون وما تكتمون قل للمؤمنين يغضوا من أبصارهم ويحفظوا فروجهم ذلك أزكى لهم إن الله خبير بما يصنعون وقل للمؤمنات يغضضن من أبصارهن ويحفظن فروجهن ولا يبدين زينتهن إلا ما ظهر منها وليضربن بخمرهن على جيوبهن ولا يبدين زينتهن إلا لبعولتهن أو آباء بعولتهن أو أبناء بعولتهن أو إخوانهن أو بني إخوانهن أو بني أخواتهن أو نسائهن أو ما ملكت أيمانهن أو التابعين غير أولي الإربة من الرجال أو الطفل الذين لم يظهروا على عورات النساء ولا يضربن بأرجلهن ليعلم ما يخفين من زينتهن وتوبوا إلى الله جميعا أيها المؤمنون لعلكم تفلحون وأنكحوا الأيام منكم والصالحين من عبادكم وإمائكم إن يكونوا فقراء يغنهم الله من فضله والله واسع عليم فليستعفف الذين لا يجدون نكاحا حتى يغنيهم الله من فضله والذين يبتغون الكتاب مما ملكت أيمانهم فكاتبوهم إن علمتم فيهم خيرا وآتوهم مال الذي آتاكم ولا تكرهوا فتياتكم على البغاء إن أردنا تحصنا لتبتغوا عرض الحياة الدنيا ومن يكرههن فإن الله من بعد إكراههن غفور رحيم ولقد أنزلنا إليكم آيات مبينات ومثلا من الذين خلوا من قبلكم وموعظة للمتقين.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back, sisters, to our third session of our thematic study of Surah Nur. Today, we'll be discussing a very interesting topic, inshallah. So let's begin. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي اللهم إني أسألك علما نافعا ورزقا طيبا وعملا متقبلا ربي زدني علما. So today our topic is going to be about the Muslim woman. Before we begin, I thought we'd just have a quick recap of what we've discussed so far in the previous two sessions. So we discussed in the first session the beauty of Surah Nur, as well as the background of revelation. We discussed how a law is implemented by theory and then by practice, and then deterrents are put in place in the form of hudud punishments. There was also a structural analysis of the surah, and we also discussed the effects on society, with women, men, and children experiencing the harmful after effects of immodesty in the society due to the fact that we've purposely chosen to avoid the nur of the Quran. And we also discussed the state of the ummah. We compared and contrasted how the ummah used to be and how it is now. We've also done a session on civilization, where we've compared and contrasted the fundamental values of Western and Islamic civilizations. We've also discussed the role of individualism and its contribution to the current state of society, also the family unit and how important it is from an Islamic perspective. We also discussed the rights of other members of the community, like our neighbors and parents and other Muslim brothers and sisters. And we also had a discussion on the psychological and spiritual need for companionship. Now, today's topic, the Muslim woman, is a very interesting one. The seed, which is our concept, our theme, is the Muslim woman, and the soil is how the Muslim woman fulfills her roles in the family and in society. When we plant the seed in the soil, we will experience growth, and we will be able to ensure that we maintain our femininity, whilst at the same time being useful members of the home and society. We will also be able to educate ourselves regarding our rights and responsibilities and then implement that knowledge in every role that we have. Now, how we experience the fruits, the flowers, and the change, I will come back to this question, inshallah, at the end of the session, where I will ask you sisters to please pitch in and explain to me how we're going to be observing the change that comes from all of this, inshallah. So we start with, first of all, the role and responsibilities of a believer. The question I'd like to ask all of you is, what is the purpose of our creation? Your sisters must know by now that I ask a lot of questions. So inshallah, I hope everybody will be able to participate today as well. So what is the purpose of our creation? Can anyone please tell me in the chat box? To worship Allah. Yes, that is it. Yes, that is exactly it, to worship Allah. We have in the Quran, وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ, and I did not create the jinn and man except to worship me. So when we know the purpose of our creation and why Allah created us, then we will be able to fulfill our mission. So why did Allah create us? In order to worship Him and fulfill our mission, spread the deen of Allah, as well as ibadah, which can be a specific thought, intention, emotion the way we walk, the way we talk, our manners of eating and drinking, and our every action can be classed as worship if we do it according to the Sunnah. Now that we know our role as a believer, what is our role as a Muslim woman? Right? So let's begin with, first of all, how Islam perceives education. Back in the 7th century, Muhammad SAW declared the pursuit of knowledge, and we have a hadith on it. And this led to one of the most influential scholars of Islam, which was our mother Aisha radiallahu anha. Now, after his passing away, men and women would travel from everywhere to learn from her because she was considered the greatest scholar of Islam, the greatest faqih. And this recognition of female scholarship and women's participation has been encouraged and practiced throughout the majority of Islamic history. For example, in Al-Qarawiyyin Mosque and University, the oldest running university, was funded by a woman, Fatima al-Fihri, in 859. So one of the oldest universities has been funded by a woman. MashaAllah. One of our other roles as a Muslim woman is in motherhood. And in Islam, Allah clearly gives mothers a higher status. We have the hadith that paradise lies under the feet of mothers. And we also have the very famous hadith where the Prophet ﷺ told the person who came to him, your mother, your mother, your mother, in reply to his question of who's the most deserving of my fine treatment. Very famous hadith. Everyone knows that, right? The third angle that we can consider our role as a Muslim woman is through politics and social services. And although not many people know this, but amongst the early Muslims, women were active participants in the function of society, right? They expressed their opinions freely, their advice was sought, they went to battle in order to be actively participate as nurses to be able to nurse the wounded, and some even participate in the battlefield. We have accounts from Ghazwa Uhud, as well as some of the later Ghazwas in which women actively participated in the battlefield, right? So women, they also traded in the marketplace. And the second Khalifa, Umar radiallahu anha, he actually appointed a woman, Shafa bint Abdullah, as the supervisor of the marketplace. They also participated in government roles, in public affairs, in lawmaking, scholarships, and teaching. Another role that a Muslim woman plays is in inheritance. We all know that. We discussed that yesterday, how women all across the globe before the advent of Islam were deprived of inheritance and were themselves considered property to be inherited by men. Islam gave women the right to own property and inherit from relatives, which was a revolutionary concept in the 7th century. We'll be discussing this in further detail in a bit, inshallah. We also have financial responsibilities. Woman has the right to work. She has no obligation to share her money with her husband. And we all have the example of Khadija radiallahu anha, who was an amazing, successful businesswoman, one of the most successful businesswomen of Mecca. And she did not owe her money to the Prophet. The Prophet ﷺ did not lay any claim on her wealth, yet she freely spent from her wealth to support her husband and the cause of Islam. We also have are defined by our roles in marriage, where the woman has the right to accept or reject marriage proposals. Her approval is required to complete a marriage contract, and she cannot be forced to marry someone against her will. She also has the right to divorce. We've discussed this yesterday, so I'm just going to go through it very quickly. And we have in the Quran, وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ أَنْ خَلَقَ لَكُم مِّنْ أَنفُسِكُمْ أَزْوَاجًا لِتَسْكُنُوا إِلَيْهَا وَجَعَلَ بَيْنَكُم مَّوَدَّةً وَرَحْمَةً إِنَّ فِي ذَلِكَ لَآيَاتٍ لِقَوْمٍ يَتَفَكَّرُونَ. He's creating spouses for you out of yourself so that you might take comfort in them, and He's creating love and mercy among you. In this, there is evidence of the truth for the people who carefully think. This is from Surah Nur, Surah Rum, sorry. Then we have another hadith on marriage, where the Messenger of Allah ﷺ said that believers who show the most perfect faith are those who have the best behavior, and the best of you are the ones who are best to their wives. So alhamdulillah, we have several rights and responsibilities as our unique role as a Muslim woman. We also have something additional, which is the dignity and protection from harm. So any form of emotional, physical, or psychological abuse is prohibited. Islam does not allow oppression or abuse of women, and all of God's creation is dignified. We know that when in the last khutbah of the Messenger ﷺ, he enjoined be good to women, and this was also one of his last advices before he passed away: be good to women, right? Then we also have a concept of modesty in the environment, which constantly emphasizes the physical form through various media. Women are constantly faced with an unattainable standard of beauty. It's become it's come to the point where you don't know what's real and what's not anymore. And although Muslim women are falsely classified as oppressed based on their modest dress, they are in fact liberated from such objectification by the society around them. This modest appearance highlights a Muslim woman's personality and character instead of her physical figure and promotes a deeper appreciation for who she is as a person. Right? So, moving on, we have modern day gender ideologies, which we're going to be discussing in detail. Now, first of all, is the concept of feminism. How does society define feminism? Can anyone tell me in the chat box what is society's definition of feminism? Equality to man. Yes, that is correct, sister. Okay, that we are the same as men, equal. Okay. Advocacy of women's rights. Right, that's correct, sister. Okay, okay. Mashallah, good answers. So I'm just going to skip through this for now because we're going to be discussing it in a lot more detail in a minute. Now, what is the problem with this ideology? The fact that modern day feminism claims that men and women are equal in almost every sense, right? Can anyone please highlight the problem in this ideology? Okay, Dr. Sadi has already given a really good answer of women's rights, but they have contradicting rights as well. It does not recognize the unique features of the female. Okay, total equality between the sexes. Okay, the problem, okay, it's against the teachings of Islam. Men can't accept this. Another sister says that biologically we are not the same. That is 100% correct. Biological and psychological. Okay. Okay, opposite Islam. MashaAllah, good answers, MashaAllah. Jazakallah, sisters. Right? So, firstly, it sets men as the gold standard. It says we're going to be equal to men, which basically, in a way, we're saying that men are better than us and we need to be achieved that standard in order to be seen as with the same amount of respect as people see men. Who said men were the gold standard here? You know, it's society that said that. We are saying essentially that whatever men do is ideal and we must reach that ideal. And this idea, this mentality that whatever men do, we must achieve that too, this is the problem here. Now, okay, I'm going to skip through this again because we are going to be discussing this now, inshallah, in greater detail, right? The first thing I want to discuss is that when you have a cursory look into the Islamic tradition, it not only demonstrates the privileged position of women in terms of their status, their rights, and their rewards with Allah, but the vast variety of roles women have played throughout the history of Islam. Right? We had female companions, Habiyat of the Prophet ﷺ, who are proud of their roles of of a Muslimah, of a mother, of a daughter, of a teacher, of a scholar. And even when needed, they actually stepped in and fulfilled traditionally male roles. Right? I'm going to give you an example of Nusayba bint Ka'b radiallahu anha. She was one of the only two women to personally pledge, give bay'ah directly to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu right? And this was when they traveled all the way from Medina to Mecca to pledge to give their pledges. She then returned to Medina and began teaching Islam to the women of the city. Now, this inspirational lady, mashallah, in the Battle of Uhud, Nusayba radiallahu anha, she attended the battle and her intention was to bring water to the soldiers while her husband and her two sons fought. However, as most of you may know, the Battle of Uhud did not go as planned, right? In the middle of the battle, the tides turned and the battle started going against the Muslims. This is when some Muslim archers disobeyed direct orders and they abandoned their post when they thought that the battle had been won. There was a surprise attack from the kuffar, and this led to an immense amount of loss for the Muslims. During all this, the Prophet Muhammad was also injured quite a bit. When this happened, Nusayba radiallahu anha, she actually entered the battle itself carrying a sword and shield, and she defended the Prophet ﷺ from the arrows of the enemy. And she also was injured whilst fighting. Now, to us at this point in time, sitting right now in the 21st century, this sounds pretty amazing that a woman would do that at that time. But if we think of it, at that time, this defied all gender norms, the fact that a woman entered battle and fought. It was not an easy thing to do. But to Nusayba radiallahu anha, and as should be for every Muslimah, the life of the Prophet mattered more than anything else. So she went against the customs of those times, and she entered the battle, fought, and defended the Prophet for single-handedly. So you can imagine the character, the strength of these Muslim women, that they were able to not only take pride and ownership of the roles that Islam had given them, but when needed, they stepped in and into the roles of men and did what they needed to be done at that time. Now, to the main topic today. Today, this is the main topic that I'm going to be discussing, which is the sexual liberation social movement of the past 100 years. Now, there are several offshoots of the modern sexual liberation movement, and they can be referred to as isms, right? That's the best way to say it, isms, right? So we have feminism, then we have gender roles, right? How do we define gender roles in today's day and time? And then we have the LGBTQ plus movement, which we'll be discussing in a bit more detail. Now, according to a conference that took place in Mexico City, the United Nations Conference on Women's Issues, feminism is defined as the political expression of the concerns and interests of women from different regions, classes, nationalities, and backgrounds. Now, feminism itself is a very broad movement and has several sub-movements within it. In fact, one of the most famous feminists of our era has said that every feminist has their own private type of feminism. The word feminism, usually, more often than not, invokes very strong and extreme reactions from us, especially us women. And some reject it completely and are opposed to any trend called feminism, and some embrace the concept completely and automatically get heated and argumentative when the word feminism is mentioned. Let us look at this concept and not the terms, because as Muslims, Allah commands us to be fair and just. So let's simply discuss it, what it is, where it comes from, what the Sharia and the Quran and the Sunnah say about this concept. So let's try and approach this from a fair perspective today, sisters. I really ask you to keep an open mind and try and not to get too wound up when we discuss certain issues. I know that because most of us have been taught Western feminism, the Western ideology of feminism, and a lot of those concepts clash with the Islamic values, it does end up with us maybe getting a bit heated, a bit upset at certain aspects of Islamic feminism. But inshallah, if we make the niyyah, the intention to approach this from a fair and just perspective, then Allah will make it easy for us to understand, inshallah. Right? So, first of all, let's discuss the religious perspective. We need to understand the source before we dive into it. So, women in Christendom and in Europe were treated very differently than women in the Muslim world. Women were viewed as the source of temptation according to both the Old Testament and the New Testament. And what's mentioned in the Bible basically about this is that the cause of the fall of Adam was Eve. And so Eve is blamed for the status of man because Eve tempted Adam, they were expelled according to the Old Testament. And then God punished Eve, and by extension, every single woman through the pain of childbirth as a form of punishment for Eve's treachery. Now, Alhamdulillah, Islam doesn't follow this perspective, right? It doesn't agree with this perspective. If we look at the Quran, rather, it is Adam alayhi salam who is kind of blamed for this. Adam disobeyed and made a mistake because the Quran does not blame Eve or Hawa alayhi salam at all. Even if, for instance, Hawa alayhi salam had asked Adam to eat it, at the end of the day, she didn't force him. She didn't put the fruit in his mouth. He did that himself. So it doesn't make sense to put all the blame on her. So from the Islamic perspective, Adam alayhi salam is held responsible and not Hawa alayhi salam. Allah forgave him, and there is no concept of original sin in Islam, which is contradictory to what the Bible teaches Christians. Now, from a legal perspective, we have a different status than men, right? Now we're looking at the European perspective right now. This is in the 17th and 18th centuries. So a married woman lost all her political rights and was considered a property of man when she got married. She could not own property, couldn't engage in contracts. She didn't have an independent existence in the terms of owning property. She was quite literally the property of her husband. That's why she would typically change her last name to reflect that of her husband, that she had basically become her husband's. And if you, for example, read literature, classical literature from that era, a very famous author, Jane Austen, comes to mind. It kind of gives us an insight of how women were treated in terms of marriage. When it came to inheritance, they didn't inherit anything, etc., etc. So it gives us an idea of how society treated women at that time. In Islam, we know that a woman is never the property of anyone. She's an independent financially. We know from the story of Khadija that I just mentioned that the Prophet ﷺ did not own her money even after he married her, and she was still considered the owner of her own wealth. From an educational perspective, the women were not educated. That was exclusively the domain of men. It was only at the beginning of the 20th century that women were given the opportunity to gain education, and that was not an easy road. There were lots of difficulties. They had to fight with the system every step of the way. So, keeping all this context in mind, it's not surprising at all that women in Europe began to ask for more rights and privileges. Because prior to this, they had nothing. They were treated like nothing, unfortunately. If you look at the educational perspective, in the 16th, 17th, and 18th centuries, we have stories of wives of diplomats or wives of men going to Islamic lands. And they would write chronicles of their experience in Muslim lands. And if you read I've shared an excerpt here from a letter written in the 17th century by the wife of the British ambassador to the Ottoman Empire. And as if you read it, you can see that she is basically jealous of women, that the rights of the women that were granted in Muslim lands. So if we see some of the things that I've highlighted, they're allowed to move freely. They can conduct business transactions without the need for a male guardian. They have the right to inherit property. They can seek divorce, high positions of power and influence in the Ottoman court, etc., etc. So she was a bit envious of the women, and how the tables have turned now. The same European women now look at Muslim women as repressed, as not having their freedom, as someone in need of liberation, etc. So it's extremely ironic. However, at that time, European women looked up to Muslim women as the criterion, as something to be sought for, to be envious of. So the way that, if you look at history, it was actually Muslim women who were considered liberated by the West for several hundred years. And it was only the past 150 years or so, or maybe approximately 200 years, that this stance has changed. Now, if we look at the different stages of feminism, it can be basically described as having come in waves. So there was the first wave, which was in the 19th century, then the second wave, which was between the 1960s and 1980s, and then there was the third wave, which is post 1980. So that was the late 80s, early 90s. And the main purpose of this movement was to allow women the right to vote. So the first wave, the main purpose was to allow women the right to vote, right? So this was basically in the middle of the 19th century, around 1850 to 1860. That's when it was initiated. Women would come together. They would march on the streets. Does anyone know of the suffragette movement? I'm sure some people, some of you must have learned about the suffragette movement at school. So if anyone can please kind of explain to me what this movement is about in the chat box. Just a brief kind of explanation. See how many sisters are awake. So what was this movement about, the suffragette movement? It gave women the right to vote. Anything else? Like, what was it about? How did women go about doing it? Did it achieve its purpose, etc.? wages. Yes, that's correct. Okay, women's rights. Yes, one of their methods was protesting in public. Excellent, sister. Yes, they rallied. That's right. That's right. Mashallah, good answers, right? So they would come together, march on the streets, write letters, organize petitions for parliaments. They're very passionate for their cause. In a very famous case, a woman actually committed suicide in order to bring attention to this cause. She actually jumped in front of a racehorse and she was trampled, and she did that on purpose so that because the king was attending the ceremony and she wanted to bring to the king's attention that this movement was very important to them. So this wave of feminism was highly successful, right? And one country after another, they gave women the right to vote. And but why were they doing it? Because they knew that the right to vote was the key to open other avenues and change other aspects of society. If you observe the gap between the first wave and the third wave, we can see that it is very, very big, very extreme. Because what the women were asking for in the first wave, they were their basic rights, rights that Islam basically has given us, right? The right to vote, and it was a very, shall we say, it was a very modest movement. The women did not say that we are not opposed to femininity or not opposed to our roles as mothers. We just want our basic rights, the right to vote, the right to be maybe more involved in society, etc., etc., the right to own a contract. However, if you observe the third wave, which we have kind of all experienced growing up, you'll see that there are extreme kind of differences in what the women were demanding. So, and we'll discuss the reasons shortly. So they were not opposed to femininity. They dressed modestly, even by the standards of their time. They dressed very modestly, right? They always made sure that their hair was covered. They always dressed appropriately, and they upheld the value of the family and the virtues of femininity. They were dressed in a very dignified manner and just dressed in noble clothes, and they were not opposed to motherhood. So this first wave was a very like if I'm just sharing a picture here of the suffragettes from the suffragette movement. Just observe their dress, and you can see just how modest they look. You know, they look they're completely covered, and they've all made sure their hair is covered. There's some of the women in this era, they didn't dress like this. The clothes were slightly more, you could say, immodest, but they made sure that they were modestly dressed, that their dignity wasn't sacrificed. Then what happened? The two great world wars happened, World War I and World War II. And gender dynamics changed irreversibly because during the wars, men would not be able to remain in the cities or villages. They were forced to go and fight. And what happened was that the villages and the cities became dominated by women. There was no one to run the factories. There was no one to kind of go out and work, and no one to make the machinery run. So some up till that point, women were not seen doing these sort of things. This was something that was done by men solely. However, and it was basically unacceptable, unheard of for a woman to work in a factory. Typically at that time, they had very few jobs like a midwife, a nurse, teacher, certain roles that were considered socially acceptable according to that time. So when the Great World Wars happened, this opened the doors for them to go out and do men's job. If something very interesting, they were not very willing at the beginning because, like I said, it wasn't socially acceptable for them to work in factories. The governments had to run campaigns to convince them, give them additional perks that you must do this for your country, etc., etc. I mean, they had to give them incentives. And in some cases, they even guaranteed that there would be no men present in the factories because the women were worried about sexual harassment, etc. So that led us to the second wave of feminism, right? Is this second generation, this second wave, basically, it reaches its pinnacle here. So the emphasis of the second wave of feminism was very different from the first wave. The first wave was dignified, it asked for basic rights, and this is very much aligned with Islam. The rights that they were asking, Islam also gives women these rights. However, the second wave, it's not the same. So, sorry, women basically in this wave claimed that they wanted control over their bodies. in particular, their sexuality. So how to dress, who to sleep with, the right for abortion. Now, I want to ask you sisters a question. Why did all of a sudden abortion become such a big issue at this specific point in time? Does anyone know the answer to that? Why were women at this point in time asking for abortions? And why had they not asked for it before, maybe in the first wave or before that? Why was it Wade versus Roe? Yes, but that is we're talking around the issue of why it happened, right? Wade versus Roe is a very famous case. Yes, that's correct, in the US. Prostitution, okay, religion, because of breakdown of the family. Yes, that is correct. Relationships outside the family. Because for the first time ever, premarital sex was becoming common. Before this, it was taboo and it was not the norm, and people waited to get married before initiating in sexual relationships. Now, what was the problem here? Premarital sex was becoming common. The problem was that men can have as many relationships. A man can have as many relationships as he wants, with no repercussions whatsoever. Sleep with a bunch of women, no consequences. But for women, there are consequences in the form of unwanted pregnancies. So women wanted to level the playing field. So what they wanted, what they're demanding in this wave, was the right to abortion without permission from anybody. They also demanded reproductive rights and the right to contraception. The pill was invented around this time. And they were also the beginnings of other types of feminism taking place now. The right to work in the same professions and jobs as men, as well as the right to obtain the same education as men. At that time, it was very rare to have a female architect, a female engineer, a female lawyer. These were typically male professions. So what they wanted now was to be able to have the same profession as a man. And in order to do that, they wanted to have the same kind of education that men did. They also started demanding equal pay, no discrimination. And then after that, certain anti-discriminatory laws were passed in several states. This leads us to the third wave of feminism. It began in the late 80s or the early 90s. It's very multifaceted. It's not just one topic, there are several different topics. So we have many different strands of feminism here, each championing for a different cause. So one is championing that women should not be harassed, which again is an Islamic kind of concept where Islam believes in the protection of women. So yes, it's very much aligned with the Islamic ideology. Another strand is demanding equal pay, break the virtual glass ceiling. Then some of them are religious in nature, where women are wanting to become priests and rabbis. We have this sort of strand in Islam as well, where certain women want to have the same role as, for example, imams. Other types are absolutely at odds with one another. For example, specifically prostitution and pornography. You have women on both sides of the equation in here. So some women are claiming that it's disgusting, it's demeaning to women, and it shouldn't be allowed, it should be banned completely. And then we have people on the other side of the spectrum who claim the exact opposite, that it's like just any other job. Women who are in these sort of professions of prostitution and pornography, they should be granted government protection and they should all make it legal. Unfortunately, some strands, as we just mentioned, are extremely vulgar. There's even one strand that demands public nudity, that is their legal right, that they can walk however they want, wherever they want, and nobody should have the right to stare at them or ogle them, and that their beauty, it should be displayed to public, right? So this is again a very vulgar strand of feminism, and it doesn't really align with our Islamic concepts. So moving on, now that we understand feminism and where it came from, moving on, we have our second topic, which is gender roles. So in the Quran and Sunnah, there is a spectrum of opinions regarding feminism. So there's not just one sort of guidelines. And we have in, sorry, I forgot to mention the surah reference here. The Lord answered their prayers. I do not neglect anyone's labor, whether the laborer be male or female. So we have specific mentions of females in the Quran. This came from Salama, the wife of the Prophet ﷺ, our mother, who actually asked the Prophet ﷺ that why are women not mentioned specifically in the Quran, and why are all the commandments directed towards men? And then she asked him that did we not migrate for the sake of Allah? Are we not spiritually equal? I'm just summarizing the hadith for you. The Prophet ﷺ remained silent, and after that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed several verses where men and women were addressed separately. So we have several mentions of women separately in the Quran. We have Surah Nahl, ayah 97, Surah Nisa, ayah 7, Surah Al-Ahzab, ayah 35, Surah Tawbah, ayah 71, right? So, for example, in Surah Nisa, we have the ayah, I'm just mentioning a piece of the ayah, الرجال قوامون على النساء. Men are the protectors and the maintainers of women. Now, before I move on, I want everyone to take a deep breath, because this ayah specifically is targeted by so many people, because they have issues with the fact that a man would be a qawwam. What's a qawwam? I'll explain in a minute. So what this ayah means is that men and women, before I go to the explanation of this ayah, men and women are spiritually equal in the eyes of Allah. Okay, let's have no doubt about that. Men and women are spiritually equal, and we have complementary roles in society, not contradictory ones, complementary ones. So we shouldn't try and make everything into a gender war, because our roles are meant to complement each other. That doesn't make the role of one gender lesser than the role of the other gender. Right, so what's a qawwam? A qawwam, the word comes from the word qiwama, and which means a lot of things. So we'll discuss it one by one. It means to be responsible for being in charge, for maintaining the woman, for protecting the woman, for being responsible for the woman. And all these are part and parcel of qiwama. So men are responsible to take care of women. And in Sharia, women theoretically don't have to spend a single penny to take care of their needs. There's always some qawwam there to take care of her. So there's either her husband, her father, her brother, her son. All of these can take care of her in any point in life. So she is the responsibility, and she has to be protected by the qawwam. In real life, it doesn't always happen that way. We have certain situations where women don't have any qawwam, or if the qawwam is there, he doesn't behave like a qawwam, etc., etc. But theoretically, in Sharia, women have someone to always to take care of her. Now, my sisters, I ask you, what is wrong with that? What is wrong with someone taking care of you? Right? Women do have issues with this. I've heard so many sisters who have issues with why men have been assigned the protector. Qawwam doesn't mean that men are the masters or that they're better than us. I've already mentioned that spiritually we are equal in the sight of Allah. They are given an additional responsibility. And with responsibility comes privilege, a degree of respect. Now, at the end of the day, two people cannot be in charge of one thing. For example, if some of you sisters work in the corporate sector, sometimes if there are issues with expectations defining roles, we might have two people who think they are in charge of the same role. What happens then? What happens if two people think they're in charge of the same role? Words are said. There's issues, and there's anger flare-ups, and there's the two people clashing with each other, right? We have clashes. So we can only have one captain of the ship. We can't have two captains. So at the end of the day, two people cannot be fully in charge. So just for the sake of logistics, there needs to be a hierarchy. Again, this does not mean that the man is the owner or the husband has mastership. And why? Because they have certain characteristics. So men are physically stronger. So when you look traditionally, they are the ones that fight in the wars, they're the ones tilling the field, they're the ones harvesting, they're the ones defending. Feminism, in fact, couldn't even have taken place in the pre-industrial world. It's only modernity and the ease of society that that has given way to the modern feminism. So Islam is not about equality. I know it hurts some people when we say this, but Islam is not about equality. It's about equity. There is no competition between the genders. There doesn't have to be any. So this is the part of the ayah that some people, maybe don't like. وَلَهُنَّ مِثْلُ الَّذِي عَلَيْهِنَّ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ. وَلِلرِّجَالِ عَلَيْهِنَّ دَرَجَةٌ وَاللَّهُ عَزِيزٌ حَكِيمٌ. وَالرِّجَالُ عَلَيْهِنَّ دَرَجَةٌ. Men have a degree of advantage over them. Men have a degree of um, they're not exactly, I guess you can say, a bit of superiority over them. And this is the part of the ayah that many women have issues with. Sisters, look at the amount of responsibilities the man has. We have barely any responsibilities according to the Sharia. According to Sharia, one of the few responsibilities that we have are guarding our chastity and the tarbiyah of our kids. One of the basic responsibilities we have. The man has so many responsibilities, right? He has to take care of the family, he has to protect the women, he has to maintain them, give them earn a livelihood for them, etc., etc. Right? They both have responsibilities towards each other, but men have more. He has to pay the rent, he has to buy the groceries, and as I mentioned, two people cannot be in charge. So if there's a decision that has to be made that is, for example, not mutual, then the man can make the final decision. So what does this translate to? Something very interesting that I learned while I was preparing for this session. Allah did not specify in detail the chores that men have to do and the chores that women have to do. There are generics, okay, that men are financially responsible, women have to guard themselves and their chastity, etc., etc. But other roles within the marriage are left to culture and custom. What this means is it's allowed to swap certain roles if they both agree to it. The Sharia won't hold them sinful. So ideally, the primary roles for the man is to be the caregiver, the maintainer, the protector. And the ideal role for the woman is the therapy of the children. But it is not obligatory, and they can swap roles if they mutually agree to do so. For example, the wife is earning a lot more than the husband, and she says, "Look, it's probably advantageous for the family that I be the primary caregiver." And the man then, if he has really good fathering skills, decides that he can be a stay-at-home dad, right? So they can mutually agree to swap roles and responsibilities within the household. And this is where the beauty of the Sharia, the fact that the Sharia did not provide a list of gender-specific roles, except for the very basic rights of and responsibilities of the man and the woman, and everything else is just filled in by culture and customs. Now, this brings us to the third main topic of the day, which is the LGBTQIA movement, right? It stands for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transsexual, queer. I believe it's intersex and asexual. I'm not 100% sure about the last one. Movement. So basically, alternative sexualities. Historically, these types of sexualities existed, have always existed, but they were considered taboo and were not considered normal. They were always done behind closed doors and they weren't publicized. And in some cases, they were also criminalized. In the past 30 years, this has changed dramatically. Now, anyone who thinks that sexuality is confined to just a man and a woman is considered antiquated, backwards, and it is now legal for same-sex couples to be married. And this shift came about in just 30 years. How did it start? It started with it can be traced back to the gay riots, which are called the Stonewall riots in 1969, where a group of gay protesters challenged the police. That same year, two Harvard graduates came up with an activist plan called After the Ball. It's After the Ball, How America Will Conquer Its Fears of Gays in the 1970s. And they came up with a 6-point plan. What's this plan? I'm just going to share it with you very quickly. Talk loudly about gays and lesbians to desensitize people. This is from the plan itself. Portray gays as victims so that people have sympathy for them, right? Make those who fight for homosexuality as heroes of society, that they're doing something extremely noble. And then have some sort of control over the media to make homosexuals look good. If we look at the movies then in the 1960s and 70s, and we look at the movies now, we'll see a visible difference in the way that gays and lesbians were portrayed. Right? They were portrayed very differently 40, 50 years ago, even if they were even portrayed at all. There wasn't very much mention of them in the movies in 50, 60 years ago. We look at the government's stance on homosexuality then and now. I believe all the way back to the 1950s, it was a crime to be homosexual, right? However, we Muslims need to think long and hard about the Sharia stance. Let me just finish going through the plan before I go ahead with this. So there was a debate about the media, and then make those who are against the community look bad. We ridicule them and call them fundamentalists. You know, the same thing that we mentioned, to call them backwards and antiquated, etc., etc. The sixth one is really interesting. Get major donors and corporations to support LGBTQ movement financially. And we can say that this activist plan was very successful. It took only 30 years to transform the society's perception of this community. However, we need to think about the Sharia stance. If we think about it, if adultery and fornication between a man and a woman is considered haram, then there's no question about sex between the same genders. There is unanimous consensus amongst all groups, all sects, all school of thoughts that same-sex relationships are not allowed in Islam. So we need to be very clear here. Something that I want to be very clear is only the action of sodomy that is considered sinful. So the act is considered sinful. Sharia does not discuss feelings or inclinations in imaginations. Okay, so maybe they were born that way. I'm not going to argue with that. I'm not for or against that. The Sharia is not criminalizing thoughts. So it doesn't make anyone any less of a Muslim if they have thoughts related to the same gender, same sex, right? So just because there is a lust in the heart doesn't mean it must be acted on. We go sometimes too harsh on our brothers and sisters. We dehumanize them, right? We're cracking, jokes about them, etc., etc. When we don't know what struggles they are going with, right? The Sharia is not dealing with emotions of the heart. The Sharia tells them that they are just as dignified, just as pious, even if they have these thoughts in their minds. Now, if someone is struggling with that and refuses to act upon it, they are a better Muslim for it. So merely feeling attractions doesn't make anyone sinful. Now, what happens if someone acts on this desire? If someone acts on this desire, the first thing to remember is it does not make them a non-Muslim. Even murder does not make someone a kafir, right? Shirk does not. Well, murder. Okay, let's stop at murder. So if a Muslim is engaged in this act, we say to them, dear brother or sister, this is not something that Allah approves of. If you feel attraction for the opposite gender, so for example, someone is feeling attraction for the same gender. If they have any feelings of attraction for the opposite gender, then the Sharia asks them to please get married, right? However, if they feel zero attraction for the opposite gender, zero attraction, then they are guided towards a celibate lifestyle, to not marry at all, right? This is a test for them. This is a very big test for them, and we cannot imagine the struggles that they go through if they have these sort of feelings and are not able to act on it. So we cannot change the Sharia because the laws or the social norms of a country have changed. Now, what is the advice for us as Muslims in Western lands? To be kind to them. You were not allowed to make fun or look down on that community. And our conversation should be centered around faith lines, not that homosexuality is haram, because we're living in a non-Muslim country. However, the government should not be forcing their ideology on the Muslim community, because this community would not like it if we forced our ideology down their throats. So this goes the other way around. Their ideology should not be forced down the throats of people who are opposed to it. There needs to be mutual respect and understanding between both communities. Sisters, I ask you, how are we going to guide people to Islam if our hearts are full of anger or hate or derision? We need to have a heart full of sympathy and mercy. Many times the people from this community who are involved in this lifestyle, they are very, very kind and supportive people. And sometimes you find them to be the biggest supporters of Muslims, of the lifestyle of Muslims. So we can recognize the good whilst preaching in a gentle manner with wisdom. Being harsh, being hateful, being insensitive it will not earn us any brownie points. It won't win any conflict. There needs to be a respect when opposing the other this community, when discussing our views with this community. There needs to be a modicum of respect and dignity. because we are not allowed, we're only allowed to hate the sin, right? Not the sinner. So we cannot hate people based on their lifestyle choices. We need to have a gentle and wise approach when dealing with these issues. So inshallah, I hope this has really kind of, sorry, I'm just going to read okay, Sister Fatima, I will deal with this inshallah. Okay, yes, you're right. It's important to mention the impact of feminism, lessening of the Qawwam role on the Muslim female youth, because feminism made women demand for equal rights. What happened was that the Qawwam role itself has diminished because we have been asking the Qawwam to give up their rights, roles, and for us to be taking them on, right? So this also is something that needs to be addressed, that the Qawam should be allowed to uphold the responsibilities. Why would we want more responsibilities on ourselves? I can't fathom why women would want additional responsibilities on themselves when someone is already enjoined by Allah, by the Sharia, to take on those responsibilities, right? So by not discussing this observe or confuse youth. Oh, I'm talking about when we are in conversation with people from this community, Sister Fatima, when we are discussing the concept of homosexuality from people from this community, then we shouldn't be starting off with haram, because this won't open any doors for good dialogue, right? I'm not talking about dealing with our own youth, inshallah. Okay, sisters, I will deal with questions at the end. So there's not just the after effects of feminism that we're dealing with. It's like I mentioned yesterday, one of the biggest trials of this ummah is immodesty, right? So people are free to do what they want, to wear what they want, eat what they want, or watch what they want, and we are being constantly bombarded with indecency from all sides. So I thought this was a very, I hope it works, because sometimes this acts up. So let me see if I can play this. I thought this was a very interesting AI generated. It's not playing. Sorry, sisters. But if you look at this, if you just search, oh, okay, alhamdulillah. Let me just play this. It kind of shows how a woman's fashion has changed. Let me just run this first. You can see that the clothes are getting shorter, they're getting tighter, they're shrinking, the styles are becoming more daring, there's more skin showing. Even though at the beginning, the woman was completely covered from head to toe, right? But as this shows the past 100 years of change in the Western woman's dress. So I thought it was a very interesting way to compare how feminism and its different waves compared with the dress of the women of that era. So we know that gender norms have changed and we have temptations everywhere, right? And it's very easy now for anyone to watch indecent things on their devices. In addition to that, music has become extremely common, right? Our phones have music, our TV has music. We can't really escape from it, even if we try. There's music everywhere. And then there is also another aspect of this indecency, which is alcohol, completely widespread. And alcohol is the root of most of crime, most of our crimes that we have in society. It leads to further crimes and sins. There's car accidents, fistfights, brawls, further indecency, knife attacks. Now, with billah, some people have even been involved in incest while under the influence of alcohol, or rape. Lots of rape cases have alcohol at their center, where a person was so drunk they even realized that they were harming the other person. So we have so much exposure to indecency, and this is our test, this is our trial, how to protect ourselves, not just from the general kind of effects that feminism have on us, modern Western feminism, but also how this much indecency and how to protect ourselves from it, right? How to protect our eyes, how to protect our ears, how to protect ourselves, and while maintaining our dignity and honor, right? And I found a really good kind of example of what the situation is in society today. It's like watching people fall into a pit and then providing hospitals to fix the broken bones. So the thing is that Islam doesn't even let us get close to that pit. It's more like we have warning signs put up from a great distance that prevent us from reaching the edge of that pit. However, today's world is completely different, right? So we are losing focus due to these temptations, and because of that, our iman, our akhlaq, our spirituality, our connection with Allah, everything is being impacted. uh Extreme, it's like an extreme level of disconnect with Allah that we are experiencing these days, because we have so many things stopping us from keeping up that connection with Allah. So before I conclude, I'd once again like to point towards the communal slide and ask sisters to please participate and ask me, how will we bring about change? How will we have beneficial change at the personal, family, and community level? Now that we've know all that we've learned in this session, how about how feminism took its roots, about how Islam's approach towards feminism is, what Islam's approach is towards gender roles, what Islam's approach is towards the LGBTQ plus community. How are we going to bring about a positive change at the basic and the community levels, inshallah? So if you could just use the inbox and share with me what ideas you have, and then we'll discuss it further, inshallah. Okay, by educating ourselves, our families, and children through our character, like the Prophet ﷺ did, okay, having frank discussions with our children. Yes, we should. We can't avoid this subject from, and just not discuss it with our children. We need to be the ones to initiate it. Choosing words carefully when speaking to both Muslims and non-Muslims. Very good, Sister Nawal. Um, Sorry. Okay. Learned. Okay. Referring to the Quran and Sunnah. Yes. Okay, sisters, okay, Dr. Sadia, yes. What should be our response? Okay, so, okay, Dr. Sadia has mentioned it. I'll just rephrase the question. What should be our response to the LGBT, what should be our response to the topic of homosexuality in young Muslims? Let's put it that way. Okay, education, honesty, referring to the Prophet Lut alayhi salam, encouraging respect, agreeing to disagree. When it's our own young Muslims who are being affected by it, then our first reaction may not be a very good one, but we need to keep in mind that we can't shun them. That is the worst thing that we can do, to shun Muslims, young Muslims who are maybe experiencing feelings like this through the Quran and Sunnah. Okay, learning from the Quran. So we can't disown them and close the doors on them, saying that what you're doing is haram. As I mentioned, the Sharia doesn't have any restrictions on lust as long as it's not acted upon. So you can't shame someone for having feelings. It's only acting on those feelings that the Sharia has guidelines on, right? Connect them to Allah and Sunnah, right? The Prophet Lut alayhi salam. So give them examples of the Prophet Lut alayhi salam's Prophet Lut alayhi salam's nation, right? Okay, work on their tazkiyah and Islamic psychology to become khalil to them and then guide them. Jazakallah, Dr. Sadia. Really good answers today, mashallah. Help them to understand what our roles are. Okay, so Fatima says, I would say doing our best to keep them away from environment and friends, okay, which would corrupt them. Sister Atia says, teaching children from a young age so that they can discuss their difficulties as early as possible. Mashallah, very good answer, sister. Very good answer. So we need to tackle this from a young age and then provide them support in case they have difficulties. Okay, be clear that it's a sin and it cannot be acted on. Okay, encouraging inclusion, advising them that having feeling does not make them sinful. Yes, yes, mashallah. Okay, good. And then keeping an eye on their company because there is a lot to say about peer pressure and media influence in this. It's very common amongst teenagers of a certain age. Okay, mashallah. Any other contributions, sisters? Really good answers now, mashallah, mashallah. Teaching the importance of Allah. Okay, mashallah. Okay, so I thought I would share a little scenario before ending. So let's conclude, and I'll share the scenario, and then I can ask sisters to contribute a bit further. So to conclude, as a Muslim woman, we need to be focused on the eternal life, and we need to be focused on building a connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, when it comes to LGBTQ plus community, then we can try and build an alliance with other religious groups that follow the same thought process that we do. We do have other groups, religious groups, that follow this thought process and they don't agree to this lifestyle. So we can form an alliance with them because people are sometimes too afraid to speak up because of how things are these days. We can also keep up to date with the latest news and developments. And because sadly, a lot of the Muslim community are completely uninformed. And it's only when it's too late, once a law has been passed, when something has already been decided and done and dusted, that we all of a sudden wake up and decide, oh my God, something is happening that I don't approve of. So we need to keep ourselves updated about what's happening in the world, specifically in the country that we live in, so that when there is a chance to take action, we are able to take action, not when it's too late. Right? This is something that this is one of my biggest issues with our community, that we have our heads buried in the sand, and we only realize something damaging has happened that could affect ourselves or our children when it's too late. So we need to be more proactive about it, inshallah. Right. Now, I have a scenario for our sisters, which I'd like you all to read and then see if you can contribute to the discussion and give an answer. So you have a Muslim co-worker who often rages against Islam's repressive approach to women's rights and claims that Muslim women do not have equality under Sharia. So she's a staunch Western feminist and regularly discusses the issues with the concept of discusses the issues she has with the concept of khawam and the commands of hijab. So how best will you have a healthy discussion with her and steer her towards a positive perspective? So this is a Muslim female co-worker. However, she is she doesn't like the commands, some of the commands of Sharia that pertain to Muslim women, and she doesn't like the concept of qawwam, specifically do with how men have certain rights and responsibilities. So how would you go about having a discussion with her and maybe try and change her perspective? I left that behind and became Muslim. Okay, sister. That's a good answer. However, how about having this when you're having the discussion with someone else? So the love of Allah needs to be inculcated in our heart. How do we go about doing that, sister? And we all know someone like this who isn't ready to have any sort of discussion, who's very who gets very agitated, very argumentative, and it's difficult sometimes to kind of have a healthy discussion in this sort of scenario. I would not want to become a Muslim man because Muslim men are really burdened in Islam. Ha, good answer. I would actually say the same thing. I believe Muslim men have way too many responsibilities. Okay, with your own manners. Okay, so Dr. Patil says sometimes there is a specific life event that triggered these feelings. So it's important to let them rage away until you can figure out what exactly makes them feel this way. A very sensible answer, Dr. Patil. Jazakallah. Okay, viewpoint of good role models, not the examples of those who are not displaying good examples. Also, the contradicting values of radical feminists. So point out how radical feminists contradict each other. Like I mentioned, we have two opposing views when it comes to pornography and prostitution. We have one who are for it and one we are against, and both claim to be feminists. So feminists oftentimes contradict each other because modern day feminism doesn't have any clear goals. Why we can tell her why this is so, and in the Sharia we should also inform them that this is for our own protection. Okay. They need to know the commands of Allah and the knowledge of Quran and its message. We hear and we obey only one. Love Allah and the prophets are only gained through knowing what's in the Quran. Okay, so Sister Nabia says we need to listen to her views first, remaining patient whilst listening. Very good answer, Sister Nabia. So sometimes people who follow this sort of who have this sort of mentality are not very, like I said, not very good at listening to us. So it's best to maybe listen to the other person's view, let her have her say, and then initiate a discussion. So Sister Nawal says engage her in polite conversation, often to build a rapport with her before discussing the issue at hand. So yes, Dr. Sadi agrees that it's mostly a traumatic experience that causes a person to behave this way. Okay, politely share that it's a subject that requires time and exploration for a full understanding. Very good answer, Sister Atia. I approve this answer, mashallah. Okay, try to understand where is she coming from and what Islam means to me. Okay. We need to clarify what Islam's view is, but not confuse it with culture. And following Islamophobic views should make up the narrative. That is such a good answer. Sometimes we follow different Islamophobic views, and then we somehow are affected by them, and it makes us kind of abandon our principles in the long run. So we have a person of a Muslim who was in the news today, who I'm not going to name his name, who gained a certain position in the UK's government. However, if you would look up his views on homosexuality, you would understand maybe why he gained this position. Because some people, they decide that maybe abandoning our principles is the best way to move ahead. Speak about how you feel about being a Muslim woman. My experience is this. Okay. Okay, give her a day, then give her the talk of what view we should hold, not to be confused as Allah has given us our specific roles and responsibilities. Why do we need to take on the responsibilities of the other gender? Right? That's the question. Why? Why do we want that? Okay. Good answer, mashallah. Invite her to events for Muslim women, introduce her to other Muslim women. Okay, mashallah, mashallah. Excellent answer. Okay, we are running out of time. So inshallah, this is an amazing discussion, sisters. I wish we had more time, but yes, we are definitely running out of time. So we will need to end this discussion here, inshallah. And I hope we all learned something. Anything good that I conveyed today was from Allah, and any mistake I made was from me alone. So before we end, I'd just like to share our appeals today. We have the Rebuild Pakistan appeal. We all know that there were some devastating floods that hit Pakistan last year, which left millions of people affected. And to this day, they don't have a roof over their head because everything they owned was washed away. So the flood is still, I mean, the flood is gone, but the impact is still there. There are still millions of people without homes, without clean water, without sanitation. Any help that you provide will, inshallah, be beneficial to them. We have several packages. There's the family food pack, the livelihood for local farmers scheme, the share in mobile medical unit. This one's really good. Then the rebuilding a house scheme. My branch actually contributed £3,000 for this, and we were all so happy because this was a target that we set, and we weren't sure if we were going to make it. But yes, we managed to get to 3,000, and we sent it all to rebuild a house, inshallah. So 6,000 to rebuild another house, and then £10,000 to build a water filtration plant. Right. The second appeal today is the Livelihood for Women appeal, which helps to empower communities and transform lives. So if anyone would please like to contribute, then you can definitely go to the website and donate an amount there, inshallah. And also, I would like everyone again to please follow us on social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and as always, these all of these sessions will be uploaded on the YouTube channel almost immediately, so you can catch up on any sessions that you may have missed. Now, dua today is going to be the dua for guidance, which we need desperately in this day and age because we have so many temptations and there's so many opportunities for us to slip and fall. So let's all together make this dua. Allahumma inni as'aluka al-huda wat-tuqa wal-afafa wal-ghina. Oh Allah, I ask you for guidance and piety and abstinence and modesty and contentment and sufficiency. And all of these things that we've asked Allah for, if Allah grants us our dua, then we will never have any issues with anything to do with the Western certain ideologies again, because we will be content with that Islam has offered us. So let's all make dua to Allah. This is the month of Ramadan. Let's continuously make dua to Allah to grab us to give us this contentment and to also give us modesty and piety and guidance, inshallah. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. جزاك الله خير everyone. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.